Hello and welcome to Codebreak Album Club episode 6. We are Codebreak. Let's just very quickly introduce ourselves. I'm Carl Miller. I am Iron Man. Na, 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 vote for me. Gareth?
I'm Gareth. That's my name. That name again is Gareth. Still just play the bass.
Gary?
Gary, guitar, insert Simpsons quote here.
And Andy?
Andy, hi, instrumentalist I am this week.
Okie doke. So this week we've been listening to Andy's choice. So Andy, take it away.
Okay, this week on Album Club we'll be listening to Helmet's Meantime. A little bit of info for you. It was released in 1992, preceded by Strap It On in 1990, followed up by Betty in 1994. The bands are from New York. On this album, Page Hamilton, as you probably, or you may not be aware, is the main singer-songwriter. He's been with them since the very beginning, and I think they've had a sort of changeover of other people who, have been in the band since. But on this album, you've got Page Hamilton, vocals, lead guitar, Peter Mengede, rhythm guitar, Henry Bogdan, bass, and John Stainer on the drums. And very famously, this album was, or infamously, produced by Steve Albini of Big Black and Shellac fame, who's pretty much, I think, in the 90s produced every rock, soap, indie band that were going. He was the man to turn to for, a great production sound. A quote from Kerrang at the time, said it was a wall of angry, bitter and agonised New York street cries, which I think is rather nice for the album. So that's a little bit of info on the album. Carl, do you want to give your thoughts first?
Okay, I think I first heard Helmet maybe on like Headbangers Ball or Super Rock or something like that used to be on MTV. And the first thing I always think about when I think of Helmet is wrestling, because all their songs sound like wrestling intro music, and it's just always the first thing it always comes into my head. Maybe Gareth can attest to that a little bit as well. I think the reason that I attest to wrestling is that there was a wrestling company called ECW in the early 90s, mid 90s, and they were seen as cutting edge in terms of wrestling. They were counterculture wrestling, and what they used to do is they used to use a lot of real bands' music as intro music. So they had a wrestler called the Sandman who used to use Metallica's Enter Sandman as his music. They had the wrestler called Rob Van Dam who used Pantera's Walk as his intro music. And I'm pretty sure, I'm not entirely certain, but I think that Helmet might have been used by a wrestler, and I think that's why that band always just I associate with a particular type of wrestling. In terms of this record, there's sort of like a serious like bad assery about it. It's like if you listen to this with headphones on and you're walking down the street, you do feel like you could put your fist through a wall. It's a very angry feeling to it, and I'm very much in favour of that. The riffs, it's chocked full of riffs. There are so many riffs in it, and you can't help but bop your head to the riffs constantly over and over again. Every song's got a hooky riff to it. And I think that's maybe down to Page Hamilton, who basically wrote the vast majority of the material. Interestingly, looking up Page Hamilton, he went on to play guitar in David Bowie's band.
You did, yeah.
I had no idea about it at one point. As well as the riffs on it, that snare sound, there's a real pop to the drumming by John Stainer. Again, he went on to do some other bands. He did Tomahawk, which was one of Mike Patton's many projects, which, I'm a big Mike Patton fan. And Battles as well, he went on to do that, who I know Gary is a big fan of. So there's a certain bounciness to the record. The vocals kind of go between two types of vocals. There's a shouty vocal, and then there's an almost singy vocal that reminds me a bit of Ozzy Osbourne. The way the tone of it, particularly on a song called Give It, which I think is the third song on it. Personally, myself, I do prefer the quicker songs, the more aggressive songs, such as Ironhead, which I think is the second song on the record, because it's so aggressive. There's such an aggressive feel to it. But I think that's because of the riffs. Even the songs that aren't as aggressive are still aggressive. I do like, it's almost like a stripped down approach to the music. It's very, there's the riff, that's the hook, let's get back to that hook again. I think at the time in the 90s that was happening a lot in bands. That big riff was what you were waiting for. I also like their sort of anti-fashion approach to the band. They were a band who were just sort of like a t-shirt and jeans, short hair, no real image to them, and I think that comes across. There's no real pretension in their music. Is what you get is what you get. I think this album itself is just about the right length because of the type of band that they are. Is that sometimes if you're in that riff, sometimes you can confuse one song with another song because it's so riff orientated. There's no real sort of like head down playing. It's very bouncy feel to it. But saying that, there are smatterings of sort of more progression, particularly with the song Unsung, which I thought was one of the more commercially successful songs from this record. Towards sort of like the middle of it, I did sort of tail off, but it didn't tail off enough for me. I think I was okay with it. It was still seemed fresh to me. I've not actually listened to this record in a long time, but I've listened to it previously and dipped in and out of Helmet's back catalogue, particularly Betty, which was the album after this one. I think their influence is very important in terms of on guitar music going forward. From this point, I mean, good or bad, you could say that they were sort of responsible in a part for nu metal, because I can hear the sort of nu metal influence being taken from this record, particularly on a lot of early Deftones albums, which growing up as a sort of teenager, I was really into those first two Deftone records. So yeah, I enjoyed the album, good choice. I don't know if I would listen to it all the time, but I could certainly dip in and out of it and particularly pick certain songs that I enjoyed. So yeah, I enjoyed it, Andy. I thought it was a good choice this week.
Okay, cool, thanks, Carl. You mentioned Unsung there. I think that was like a massive MTV hit when they sort of exploded. This was their big album, and I think MTV was happening at the time as well, so I think that got a lot of airplay. Gary, we go next?
Yeah, I first heard them on MTV. There was a section on Beavis and Butthead where they played Unsung and commented about the fact that they look like ordinary guys, but they rock. So that was my first hearing of them. But I didn't hear anything other than that. And then when The Crow came out, and they had a song on the Crow soundtrack, and I really got interested. It was a song off Betty that was on the Crow soundtrack. And I really got into Betty. I was a big fan of that album. The way that Betty sounded and the way the songs were, you could see how it kind of progressed from Strap It On, which was pretty much all just shouting vocals, to this album where they started introducing some of the more singing vocals. And then Betty, they kind of shifted more to the singing, but they had some songs that were shouting rather than... So this was supposed to be the kind of middle ground where they were kind of going between the two with quite a similar ratio between them. When I was listening to the album, though, I've got to say, whereas like all the other albums that we've listened to where we've been saying, oh, it doesn't sound its age, I think this sounds quite dated. And I think it is that recording style of Albini's. I think put it in a place in time. I think it's so dry sounding that to me, it just sounded like a 90s record. It didn't sound like something which you could put into another era. Now, that, again, is probably the trends of recording, because I think a lot of the more 80s sounding recordings have become more of a trend recently again. So it could be that this kind of style, this dry, raw sound, is something that might come back again in the future. And you can also hear with the rawness of this why between, this and Pixies, how that could be the influence for why Nirvana wanted to have Albini record in utero. The other thing was that, going back to what Carl was saying about them being a big influence on what was to come with like nu metal, and I have put like a note down to say, you can hear how Deftones got their sound. I think Deftones kind of mixed it up a bit with having part influence with like kind of wall of sound, shoegaze, My Bloody Valentine type sound as well, and then more nu metal sound and vocals on some parts as well. But the other part of it is that whole like drill on a metal sheet guitar solo. You can hear that as an influence on a lot of bands progressed from this type of style, when it got into like the mid and late 90s, where a lot of the guitar solos were shrill, tinny sounding. It was almost like an antithesis of the 80s guitar solos, which were all hammer-ons and kind of rhythmical. This is very just aggressive and quite a jarring sound to the solos. In terms of the play, there is that kind of big riffy element that Page Hamilton has built everything around. I do love John Stanier's drums, and I am a big fan of Battles, as Carl was saying, and seeing them live a few times. And that is such a distinctive drum style that he's got, that even though the drum sound isn't exactly the same on Battles, you can still tell it's him because of the way that he plays. It's very kind of machine precise it's, he does keep it very tight in the way that he actually plays. That is something I always enjoy, being a part of that sound as well. Yeah, in terms of like themes that you could pick up on, a lot of the things that Andy was saying in the intro, you can hear that the lyrics and the songs about like self-loathing and kind of growing up in hard environments and acting on that and the anger built around that and putting that into the songs. Some of the songs I thought you can hear the influence that were influencing them as well, particularly FBLA 2, which has definitely got a War Pigs element to it. And also, I think that they have an argument for suing Weezer for Netta, which sounds like hash pipe at the beginning. But yeah, it was an album, again, like Carl, I don't think, if I was to go back to Helmet, it'd be Betty, because that's where I started listening to him in depth. If it was to go to the harder stuff, I actually prefer Strap It On. So this kind of gets lost for me. It's not to say there isn't good songs. There are some good songs, but it did get a bit non-specific. So I wasn't really catching a lot of it, and it wasn't staying with me for a long time. So yeah, bit of a mixed bag.
Cheers, Gareth. Gareth?
So I was all ready to go through this and do my usual. Yeah, I've not heard this one, because let's face it, I've not heard any of them. I'm surprised I'd even heard the one that I picked, to be honest. But would you believe I have heard one song before, and you can probably believe which one because it's unsung. It's the big one. It was on the soundtrack to Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, which came out in 2006, but it was set in 1992. So on that, there's when you get into cars, you tune the radio in. There's an alternative rock radio station that's got L7 and Danzig and Soundgarden and Stone Temple Pilots, and this is on there. And it's sandwiched between Ozzy Osbourne and Faith No More. So it does show, though, and I'll come on to this in a second, and it's already been mentioned, the production, sort of early 90s rock production, all sort of went in one direction. So you could listen to that without really knowing who the bands were and come away with this idea of what the sound was. And I don't know if it was the technology that it was recorded on, but everything seems to come out sounding really similar. Like I was listening to Rage Against the Machine's first album, which was, I think, 92 or 93. And that it's got that sort of no treble, sort of muddy, I don't necessarily mean muddy is a bad thing, but kind of, like sort of wall of sound guitar sound that just seemed to be on everything at the time. But yeah, so that meant every time I got in the car in Grand Theft Auto, I was trying to tune the radio in, which is one button, and shoot out the window at the same time. So that's a life skill that I learned there, and for legal reasons, I must say, have not used since. Carl mentioned my obvious point, which is that this really sounds like old school wrestling entrance music. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if every track on this had been used between 98 and 2002 for a WWF or WCW wrestler. That is a compliment for me, obviously. Yeah, the guitars, not much treble, everything in that mid to bass range, quite clipped, I think compressed. I'm never quite sure about my effects, but there seems to be some compression on there. It gives it a really focused sound, a really sort of tight sound to the music itself, even aside from the playing. So I looked up who was involved, and I was almost slightly surprised to discover that it was recorded, never produced, as we know, recorded by Steve Albini. Because I always think, like, oh, if he's done it, it's going to be an absolute racket. There's going to be nothing commercial about it at all. But this is very much in keeping. Digging a bit deeper, it turns out that the album was mixed by Andy Wallace. And Andy Wallace mixed Nevermind for Nirvana, which came out the year before. And apparently, Steve Albini was so annoyed by the changes that Andy Wallace made to his sound, when he went to do In Utero with Nirvana, he had it written into his contract that they couldn't get Andy Wallace in to mix it afterwards. So what they did instead was get Scott Litt, who was R.E.M's producer, and probably had even more of a pop sensibility coming into it. So he kind of shot himself in the foot with that one. But yeah, let's face it, not difficult to upset Steve Albini. Fish in a barrel. The lyrics, there's not much blues explosion shouting. I'll stop making that joke in a few weeks. They seem to be sort of slightly removed, almost a different tense, like the person is observing something happening to somebody else. But I imagine they're quite personal given the subject matter. There's a lot of sort of anger and struggle. They're quite judgmental in places. There's a fair bit of violent imagery, but it's early 90s rock. This is the kind of thing that you get. And a lot of the songs, and we've touched on this before, it's kind of Page Hamilton will kind of unleash a guitar solo in the middle of the song that sort of loosens everything up a little bit. So he'll go off on a face melter of some sort. And people have a bit more space, I think, behind him then to do stuff. And then it all comes back together into that very tight sort of shape. And when you're talking about tightness, you've got to talk about the drummer. And I was very impressed with John Stania or Stainer. I probably got that wrong both times, but he's just really good at, and this is something I really like about the drummers that I really like. So Mac McNeely from the G-Slizzard is really good at this as well. Kind of when he changes, he almost like signposts that the song is going somewhere else, and then drives the sort of string players along into that. I'm probably not describing it very well. I'm sure Andy could do a better job from his perspective, but I feel like he's sort of running the show behind the scenes, if you see what I mean. Rather than just keeping the beat, he's bringing the songs forward, which I think that's a very I was about to say unsung there. I'll go for underrated, a very underrated quality in drummers. And overall, I enjoyed this. I don't know if it's because we did David Comes to Life last week, and I was kind of conditioned to listen to an album for 80 minutes. But like when it stopped, sometimes I didn't realise that the album had stopped. And it would carry on playing other tracks that Helmet had done, largely from the Betty era, as far as I can make out. So I'd be going, "Oh, this one's great! Wow, like this is a step above all the rest of the stuff on the album." And then find out it wasn't on the album. So I think I'm going to listen to more Helmet, but I'm going to go to the later stuff because I seem to be sort of cottoning to that a little bit better than this. But by no means is this a bad album. I had a blast listening to it. So there we go.
Lovely. Some great opinions there. Just to pick you up on what you just said then about Betty, I think he started, like Page Hamilton started singing a bit more melodically on that one, because I have, like, obviously I've got all three of them early albums, and the first one, Strap It On, is really raw, and then you can see as each album goes by, Page Hamilton's songwriting improving. But yeah, I bought this album probably around the time when it came out, I think. Again, I've probably seen it or heard it, or someone's maybe done me a mixtape. A lot of the bands I got to back in sort of the late 80s, early 90s was other friends doing me mixtapes, and then me checking out if I liked the song, I'd go and buy the album. When I first heard Helmet, they reminded me of a couple of bands. They sort of remind me of Prong, who are also very similar with the staccato riffs, and also Danzig as well. Danzig have them very sort of like striking staccato riffs. And even going back further than that, when the Cult released the album Electric, and if you listen back to that, for me anyway, I can hear like sort of influences. When I first got the album and I sort of seen pictures of the bands, I think I listened to the songs first and the album music and what have you, and I saw pictures of the bands and they were nothing like what I expected. I suppose you expected sort of, long hair, sort of metalheads, and they just, short hair, sort of very indie looking. And I read a few quotes by them, or people who mentioned them at the time, saying the link from like indie rock to metal. Definitely, they've influenced a lot of bands since, coming off the top of my head. Deftones, definitely, as you mentioned before, Carl. Marilyn Manson, Tool as well. So yeah, I think, Pete Hamilton's like sort of sounds, he's got that from elsewhere. And I was reading up on him this week a little bit as well, and some of his favourite bands are like AC/DC and Led Zeppelin. So you can and Black Sabbath as well. You can sort of see, I think you were mentioning Black Sabbath before, Gary, weren't you? You can sort of see where, his influences come from. And then he's got this sort of sound himself, and then just took it forward with that. I think lyric-wise, I read a little bit up on the lyrics, and I think the lyrics are to do with like the mundanity of life, and coming from New York. I don't know the complete history of the band, but they maybe felt a bit downtrodden, and they're sort of rebelling against the system. There is a lyric in one of the songs, Turned Out, where they mention Downtown Julie Brown, and I think that song is about people being false. I think they were very much into the band, they're very down to earth, and I think that was a sort of reaction to say against, ironically, because they were on MTV, but all these like sort of MTV sort of reporters and people in the media being all like false and it's not a real person. So I think the lyrics sort of dealt with that a little bit. Maybe as well, I wrote this down for you, Gary, I was thinking maybe they were the forerunners of like math rock, which you're a big fan of, because they are sometimes sort of thrown in with the progressive crowds. And so that was something that sort of made me think as well. Because you hear a band and then years later, or a lot of other bands come on, you think, I can hear that from, Helmet. But I think they have been a big, massive influence on like lots and lots of bands going forward, especially nu metal. In the song Better, and Gareth, I'm going a little bit what you've just been talking about there. There is a really brilliant part. It's in the second part of the song, and the guitar riff is staying true, but the drums are like sort of playing around and going out of time. Well, not out of time, but in time with the guitars, but then on the other time signature with them. Anyway, when I listened to it on headphones, and I remember years ago when first listening to it, it just blows my mind because the drummer is incredibly clever the way he's sort of playing in and out of the time signatures. It always blows my mind and makes me smile when I listen to it, and I think, oh my God, that's like sort of so clever. But then when I first listened to it, I thought it was the guitars going like swapping places with the drums and the rhythms or the time signatures. But when I listen to it, the guitar never changes. It's just the drums going in and out of like some weird jazz signatures, which I find like amazing to listen to. I couldn't play it myself, but I like listening to stuff like that. It's like when you listen to lots of prog stuff and you're amazed by it, but then you sort of have a little go at yourself and you think, oh, I'll stick to the AC/DC beats where I'm comfortable with. But yeah, it was good listening to it again. It's an album that I bought years and years ago. I've got the three, as I say. I've got the Strap It On, Meantime, and Betty. I think I jumped in on them at this point, Gary. I know you jumped in on Betty a bit more. So this album was sort of, it's always the way, isn't it? Whatever band that you like, whatever album you jump in on is always going to be your favourite, or, you know, the one that you go back to. So this is the one I went to. Then I bought Strap It On afterwards, and then obviously a bit later on I bought Betty. But I think they're fantastic bands. I know they've split up and when he, you know, went different ways, and I think he's had a lot of different musicians in the band since. I think that they're still going at the moment. I think they released something a couple of years ago. I'll be honest, besides them 3 albums, I never really kept up with them after that. It's like you've probably done it yourself, you know, like a band you really like, and then you go with them for a few albums and then you lose them a little bit along the way, and other bands come in and what have you. But yeah.
They're I think they've had 2 new records and they're both really, really good. They went more down the progressive side of it, but yeah, they're actually really good records to listen to, the last 2.
Yeah, I was looking at the discography today, and I think I need to catch up. And even if I just download them on iTunes or something, and you know, the next couple of days, give them a little bit of a listen and stuff. But yeah, it's a great album for me, and thanks for all, you know, taking time to listen to it and giving some great feedback on it. Okay, back to you, Carl.
Okay, right. So we'll pick our favourite 2 songs on it. So mine are 2 that are mentioned: Ironhead, which I think is the second song on it. And I like the song Unsung. I know it's the big radio hit, but I think that's the song that for me is Helmet. So yeah, they're my 2. Gareth, do you want to pick yours?
They're exactly the same as yours, Carl. Unsung for the nostalgia factor of remembering all those drive-by shootings, and Ironhead, which someone's used that in wrestling. Someone has. We've just got to find out who. But yeah, good, great song.
I did actually look. I did look to see if they've been associated with anything, and there was an ECW album, but they weren't on it.
Oh.
But or maybe they might have been on that. But
I'm amazed there isn't a wrestler called Ironhead. It's perfect.
Yeah, I can't remember. There should be a band called Ironhead. I think that's a good thing.
It may well be. It might be.
Gary, do you want to pick yours?
Mine are In the Meantime and FBLA 2.
Okie doke. And Andy, do you want to pick yours?
Yeah, my 2 are Turned Out and Better. I've gone sort of away from the, you know, the hits and stuff. Although I love the hits as well, like, but they're the 2 when I listen to it. That, like, yeah.
I did like the song, the one that sounds like Ozzy Osbourne. I think that's the 3rd song, isn't it? It sounds like a Black Sabbath song to me, that as well. Okay, so we'll give it a score. So I'm going to give it 8 out of 10. Gareth?
I'm going to go for 7 out of 10. I have not prepared any closing comments, but liked it. We'll listen again.
Gary?
It's a 6.5 for me. Too much of a mixed bag, really, for me. The songs I like, I do like.
Okay, and Andy?
I'm also going to give it an 8 out of 10.
Right, okay, so somewhere in between 6.5 and 8, so 7 and a bit. Next week, we're going to be listening to Gareth's choice. So, Gareth, do you want to introduce it?
Yep, so this is going to be a bit jarring because we're going from 1992 all the way to 1992, where Bill Clinton began his first reign as US president. Euro Disney brought a Gallic twist to Mickey Mouse, and the domestication of the dog continued unabated. And one Bob Mould unveiled his latest power trio in Sugar. And next week we'll be tackling Copper Blue.
Brilliant. One of my faves there.
So, should we not bother next week then? Right, 10 out of 10.
I think this is an album maybe we've all heard.
Yeah.
Oh, brilliant.
So, yeah, there you go. So we'll be listening to Copper Blue, and which also actually, Gareth, has a wrestling link.
It does, which we'll be telling you about next week.
Yeah.
If you're a wrestling fan, stay tuned for that next week. So all I've got to say is stay safe, stay well, and don't drive to Durham if you've got really bad eyesight. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.